Welcome to the presentation, Understanding Children with Autism Spectrum Disorders. My name is Linda Tortorelli, and I'm a consultant with the Autism Program at the University of Illinois. There are a lot of myths out there about autism. Some of them are that children have average or above average intelligence, they come from wealthy families, they don't like to be touched at all, or they don't make eye contact at all, and that vaccine causes autism. We now know that these are not true. And research has showed us that they just aren't factual. Autism spectrum disorders are neurologically based developmental disorders. They produce a unique set of symptoms and they vary in severity across individuals that are diagnosed. People with ASD are wired differently. It's especially important to remember about individuals who autism really isn't apparent. They look like everybody else. We have to remember that their brain neurology is actually put together in a different way. People with autism have physical differences in several parts of the brain that involve social and emotional behavior. These include the limbic system, the amygdala, and there are other parts of the cerebellum that all are involved and impacted. When an individual is receiving the diagnosis of autism, the clinician is looking at two separate categories. They're looking for deficits in social communication, and they're looking for those restrictive, repetitive patterns of behavior. Social communication are things such as the ability to read facial expressions, tone of voice, gesturing, knowing social distance, making good eye contact. Restricted repetitive patterns of behavior are things like unusually lining up things, only looking at parts of something instead of the whole, like just the wheels of a play car. Spinning excessively or watching spinning things or trying to spin things that shouldn't be spun excessively, hand flapping, repeating things, sayings over and over, or from movies. Those are some examples of restricted repetitive patterns of behavior. Is it easy to diagnose? No, not really. You have to have a skilled clinician that has experience in diagnosing autism to be able to diagnose this effectively. It's based on observable symptoms. And not all pediatricians are familiar with the signs of autism, unfortunately. So being a good reporter of things that you are thinking or others are noticing that are unusual and reporting that to your pediatrician on those regular visits is very important. There are not any blood tests or brain scans that are available to the general public that can diagnose autism. So to get a proper diagnosis, if your child is having difficulties in these areas, it's important to ask for a referral and seek the opinion of a medical professional familiar with autism spectrum disorders. Those are generally psychologists, which would be PhD level individuals, or developmental pediatricians, medical doctors, MDs. These are generally the individuals that are best suited to make a diagnosis of autism. So how is a diagnosis made? Again, if there's no blood test or a brain scan, it is through a clinical observation of the child and lots of input from the primary caregiver. Parents will often be asked to fill out lots of checklists, hundreds of questions, because the clinician is only going to see that child in a moment, and they're going to want to get a good picture of what's going on with that child over a period of time in different circumstances and with different individuals to get a good understanding of those behaviors. The gold standard research tool for diagnostics is called the ADOS, or the Autism Diagnostic Observation Schedule. And that is administered to individuals there's different levels for very, very young children all the way through adults. And that is working one-on-one, a clinician. Actually, there's several clinicians in the room scoring and working with the child and running them through different scenarios. The Autism Diagnostic Inventory is a checklist, and the primary caregiver would be filling that out to get this information. These tools, along with good clinical judgment, is what is used to make an autism diagnosis. The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, or the DSM, is where the characteristics and the deficits of autism are listed. So in the DSM, we're in the 5th edition now, which came out in 2013. Autism spectrum disorders has been categorized into 3 different levels. So if your child is being diagnosed, the clinician will also assign a level to them. They're not super descriptive, and they're meant to be used sort of generally, but level 1 ASD refers to mild autism, saying that the individual would need maybe a minimum level of support through their lifetime. Level 2 is mid-range, and level 3 is the most severe type of autism. So the prevalence currently is 1 in 59 individuals are being diagnosed with autism. This is a substantial rise since the early 1970s when only 1 in 10,000 was being diagnosed. However, that 1 in 10,000 in 1970 was the most severe presentation. We really didn't have an understanding of this broader spectrum of the disorder that we do today. It is still 5 times more common among boys than girls to be diagnosed. However, clinicians are becoming more skilled in understanding girls better, so this gap is closing. The majority, 62% of children being diagnosed today with ASD, do not have any kind of intellectual disability, where back in the 1970s, that 1 in 10,000, they most certainly would have. We need to remember the difference between prevalence and incidence when we're talking about these rates. And prevalence refers to the proportion of people who have the condition at a particular time period in the whole population. And incidence are the new individuals coming into that population. So right now, 1 in 59 is our prevalence rate. And we don't quite have the information. There's large scale research studies that are doing incidence, how many new cases are coming in every year. And that research isn't readily available just yet. So is it rising? Well, we certainly are diagnosing lots more people, that's for sure, but what's going on? And we're a little still trying to figure that out. If you go back through historical literature, we could see people that were described through time that have characteristics that today we would understand as being on the spectrum. The wolf boy of Avignon was a young boy you might have heard about that was found in the woods and living with animals. And definitely, if you listen to the description of that child, he most likely was a child that had autism. It wasn't until the 1940s that 2 researchers working alone, Leo Kanner and Hans Asperger in Austria. Leo Kanner was describing the most severe presentation of autism. Leo Kanner, World War II was going on. He escaped to the United States and he became the father of childhood psychiatry, was known as. And Hans Asperger stayed in Austria, and he was looking at young boys in a special school that had sort of this giftedness and these unusual, quirky social habits. And he was also understanding the exceptionality that they had to detail, and was even saying that they could be good code breakers for the Nazis and trying to save their lives as not being seen as disabled children. Again, Leo Kanner is sort of credited for understanding autism at the time as a mental illness. So in 1952, the Diagnostics Statistical Manual first came out, and this disorder was categorized as childhood schizophrenia. In 1968, the next edition still had it as schizophrenia of childhood type. It wasn't until the 1980s where we start to see people thinking of autism as this developmental disorder instead of just a mental illness. And it wasn't until 1992 that we throw in a few more things: pervasive developmental disorder not otherwise specified, Asperger disorder that had its own category. Dr. Lorna Wing was a clinician in England who had a daughter with these unusual, quirky social habits. She found the work of Hans Asperger and she coined the term Asperger syndrome. She kind of regretted it and always thought of this as part of the spectrum. And then by 2013, there's an agreement that these are autism spectrum disorders, and they kind of collapse this all to one category. So when should we be concerned about a young child? Well, if they're not responding with a smile or happy expression by 6 months, if they don't mimic sounds or facial expressions by 9 months, if a baby isn't cooing or babbling by 12 months, that's definitely cause for concern. If they're not gesturing, pointing, or showing by 14 months, if they don't say a single word by 16 months, if they don't play make-believe or pretend by 18 months, if there is not 2-word phrases that are distinguishable and functional by 24 months. And anytime a child has acquired language skills or social skills and then loses them, we look for this particularly around 18 months to 2 years. That's a huge cause for concern. We don't really know for sure what causes autism, but we do know that genetics plays a strong component. We can see it running in families, and that there could be a predisposition and then something environmentally happens, and we can have environmental insults such as a birth trauma, alcohol, drug use. Those kind of toxins can really impact brain development. So now we have a medical diagnosis for a child, but that doesn't mean they're automatically eligible for special education services. Under IDEA, Individuals with Disability Education Act, these developmental challenges have to adversely affect a child's educational performance to be eligible. So a school district will also do their assessments, even if you come with a medical diagnosis, to see if and how the child's educational performance is being impacted and how they need to be supported in that education. So autism is a spectrum on numerous levels. So when you're thinking about the individual that you're concerned about, we want to think about their IQ. It could range from being very gifted to being severely impacted. Is this a very verbal child, but odd, unusual in their communication style, or do they have no functional language? Is their social interaction that of being very aloof, alone, spending time sort of alone in a corner? Are they very active when we can't get their attention because they're moving around so quickly and they're odd in their interaction? They can be very coordinated to uncoordinated. These are generally not our most flexible individuals, but there's a range of inflexibility to being highly rigid to being able to, have at least some level of flexibility, but generally rigid and inflexible behavior is a hallmark of autism. And then sensory, the majority of these kiddos are going to have some kind of sensory problems, whether it's auditory or taste, smell, touch, some kind of either under responsiveness, hyposensitivity, and hypersensitivity to some things. And they could be hyposensitive, maybe to touch, and hypersensitive to sound. So having a good occupational therapist to work through that and figuring out what's going on with your kiddo and then what to do about it is always helpful. People on the spectrum could also have many strengths, excellent focus in their special interest, really great memory, and strong design and puzzling skills. Paying a focus to details, facts, and figures can be a real strength, and being kind of honest. These aren't our best liars out there. So breaking down the diagnosis as far as communication issues, we have both receptive and expressive language. So receptive is what we can understand, and expressive is what we can say. And so generally these individuals have better receptive language than they do have expressive language, but the receptive language can be delayed as well. So even though, generally their hearing is tested and the mechanism in the ear, the hearing is fine more often. I mean, you can have a person who has autism and is deaf, so we always want to test their hearing very early on. But generally the hearing's okay, but there's something in the brain wiring that's going wrong, and it makes it difficult to process the auditory information through the brain and then be able to express it. And sometimes, again, the receptive is going okay, but the mechanism to actually speak is delayed. Okay. There are other language issues as well. So social pragmatic language, it's when an individual can say many words clearly and use long, complex sentences with correct grammar, but still have a communication problem if they haven't mastered the rules for social language, which is known as pragmatics. So what does this look like? Well, the individual may say really inappropriate things or unrelated things during a conversation, like, why are you so large, or why, say something really inappropriate about, why are you dressed like an elf today? Because you have a green and red outfit on. These are really inappropriate things to say, and they just don't have the social understanding to know that that might be hurtful. They could tell stories in a really disorganized way because they don't understand that you don't have the same information in your brain. So these are some ways that pragmatics deficits will appear. Joint attention. This is foundational for the social communication. It's when two people are sharing an interest in something. It can be an object or enjoying a concert, an event, or having a conversation about a topic that you're both interested in. Again, it means that you have a mutually enjoyable social exchange over something. So the development of social attention begins very young. 2 to 3 months, an infant can smile in response to the parent's smile. This is one of the first things we might see delays when the mom is trying to get that social smile and that baby is just not making the eye contact or looking back at them. 6 to 8 months, the baby's able to actually follow a parent's gaze. By 10 to 12 months, the baby's able to follow a point and reference and then look back at mom's face and then checking back in to see, is this okay? They're completely not verbal at this point, but they're making a lot of social communication. By 12 to 16 months, a toddler initiates and draws parents' attention to objects of interest using sounds, pointing, and looking back and forth, even before those first words are really clearly being spoken. Again, some examples are enjoying a book together, reading to your child very young, pointing at pictures and having them being able to follow along, showing off artwork or a toy to another peer because they think that they'll also like it, and asking questions to learn more about the other person. So the differences in ASD, they have a limited response to their name being called often. This is the first sign that parents think that maybe there's a hearing problem, that they're not responding to their name, difficulty in getting their attention to important information that's necessary for learning because they're not paying attention maybe to the preschool teacher's voice, limited use of their eye gaze to regulate social interactions like looking back and forth, and again, this checking back with others to share attention. I'm going to show you one short video that talks about joint attention and also gives an example of a little bit of intervention and what a parent might be able to do even in their own home.
Hi, I'm Mark A. Latimer. You may have seen me on the internet as the Millionaire Trading Mom. Honestly, though, I am just someone who's figured out some simple strategies in the stock market. Now, I could tell you all about.
It's time for Into the Spectrum's Fun Minute Tip.
Hi, I'm back again. It's Courtney Peters, and today we're going to talk about joint attention. So what is joint attention? What you're doing is sharing enjoyment with somebody. Let's think of when you're outside with somebody and you see an airplane. And so what you do is say, look, an airplane. What you're going to do is what happens is you both look up at that airplane, then you both look at each other like, whoa, that was so cool. And then you both look back at the airplane to check it out again. And then we just shared that enjoyment. Like, oh, that was cool. And we just felt that together. So what we're going to do is we're going to back that up a little bit when we're teaching it. So we're going to teach it in a little bit more simple way. But what we want to happen is we're going to pick something like their favorite toy, something that's really cool, just happen to be holding it in its fills. So what we're going to do, though, is put it pretty close by, about 2 feet away, 1 to 2 feet away. And so what we're going to do is just say, look. And what we want them to do is turn towards it and have them make eye contact with that item. So here we have the truck. So we want them to make that eye contact with the truck. And then what we're going to do is, if they're having trouble with that, if they're not looking at the item, if they're not looking at the truck, what I'm going to do is either have it maybe make some noise, like, oh, there's a truck over here, and then have them look at the truck with making noise. Or something I can do is just put it in front of their eyes, and where their eyes are gazing, I'm going to put it in front of their eyes and have them bring it back and track it. So what I'm going to do is put it in there, bring it back and say, look, and then they're going to make that eye contact. Yay. So we're going to start at 2 feet away. And then what we're going to do is just make it a little bit harder and harder and just put it actually just a little further away. So then we're going to put it now at 4 feet away. We're going to put it at 4 feet away and do the same thing. Look. 4 feet away. Then we're going to make it, once they're doing that, we're going to make it just a little bit harder. So then it goes 8 feet away, then 10 feet away, then across the room. And then they're doing some great joint attention right there. Well, then what we're going to do is maybe move it outside, move it inside. Maybe when you're out at a store, you're going to do the same thing and say, look, yeah, you're doing that out in the grocery store. So they're doing it different places. So that's super duper awesome. And so that's how you can start teaching, making that joint attention and just sharing that together. All right, thanks so much for watching. Bye, guys.
Thanks for watching Into the Spectrum's Fun Minute.
Okay. Alrighty. Okay, so that was a good example of understanding what joint attention is and a little bit of a strategy of how to improve the joint attention by using a preferred object. The social difficulties we've mentioned before, the eye contact, reading facial expressions, and body positioning. We've talked a lot about joint attention already. This also leads then to the next level, which is called theory of mind. And this is the ability to think about another person's thought perspective. So impaired perspective taking, because an individual with autism often thinks that what is in my brain is in your brain and can't really imagine that they might have a different perspective on something. And this is something else that has to be taught. The restricted repetitive range of interests, the preoccupation with interests. So again, high focus, love the thing they love more than anything else. Might be Mickey, it might be Pokemon, it might be, you name it. And then this inflexible adherence to specific non-functional routines, having to line things up in a certain way before their rituals, before they're able to move on or get upset that something gets a little out of place. And then this persistent preoccupation with just the parts of an object, opening and closing certain parts of it or spinning certain parts of it without playing with the object as a whole. In this picture, you can see kind of a nice example. This is unusual, lining things up from smallest to largest. And I imagine this little kiddo probably get very upset if you moved one of those things out of his way. Again, we just mentioned these limited interests or rigid routines or unusual interests, only vacuum cleaners. So the practical implications are that children with ASD may experience difficulty then in attending and understanding oral instruction only. We want to visually support this instruction so they can see what you're talking about, because our words are very fleeting and fast. Attending in a group so they can just focus their attention on what's important, understanding complex directions, and having those transitions between home, maybe home and school or daycare, where different expectations and routines are to be had. We talked a little bit about sensory, fluorescent lighting. Sometimes they can see the flicker or fast-paced instruction or crowded and noisy places, maybe mouthing things way beyond what is developmentally appropriate, others touching them, or smells of food. These are all issues that individuals might experience. So when we see behaviors, parents will often talk about maybe challenging behaviors, things hitting, biting. We have to think about what might be causing those. And they might be using the same behavior for different reasons at different times. So if you're trying to address something problematic like biting, well, they might be biting in one situation because they've got a new tooth coming in. They might be biting in another situation because they don't have the words to express themselves adequately. So we have, knowing all the challenges of autism, we have to think about those and apply them to the case in front of us, the situation in front of us, so that we can pull out an intervention, a strategy in our bag of tricks that's appropriate for that moment. So thinking about the communication deficits, the sensory processing deficits, difficulty with change, or even their cognitive style that might be causing this behavior that we need to address. So what are you supposed to do? All right. So it's not always clear, but taking the perspective of the child, now that you know more about autism and the child's perspective, getting into the way they're thinking about it will be helpful. Working as a team with your significant other or their team of therapists so that the child just isn't going for therapy and you're not bringing those strategies and tricks back home to your home environment. and remembering to stay calm and respectful, because if you lose it, they're going to lose it with you. And so having your own mantra, like, that's okay, take a breath, you might be saying out loud for the child, but also for yourself. Just trying to stay calm in these situations that can be pretty intense. So general strategies, visuals. As much as we can support what we're saying with some kind of visual support, whether it's the actual object or pictures of the object, will help increase understanding and decrease anxiety. When we're doing direct teaching, like really direct about breaking things down, called task analysis into the steps that are needed to complete the task, giving feedback, positive feedback. That's right. You put your clothes on right, you put your shoes on right, that's right. That's positive, using positive behavior supports, avoiding those power struggles. We can't tell individuals on the spectrum what not to do. We should use 10 times to 1 time telling them what not to do, but telling them what to do and complimenting when they do it right. This is the way to do it. Good job. I like, and being specific, I like the way that you put your train in the box. That's cleaning up. There's a lot of ways to do visual representations, from real objects to real drawings, real photographs, to board maker or more graphic type of picture representations and written word. We should use visual schedules at home and in the classrooms. They help things run more smoothly, to know what's expected, increase independence, provide some consistency and predictability in building these routines, decreases the emotional response to transitions when you know what's expected. And it increases actually flexibility, because if they know I check my schedule will tell me what to do. If I change it on the schedule, you can get individuals that are pretty rigid to be much more flexible. We have some examples here. Here's some real pictures. This is, child wash hands with the picture and the word. Here's some board maker pictures. Here's some real low-tech ways to just have checklists or a pad of paper and a pen and ready to go to create your own. There's more high-tech communication devices, simple line drawings. When it comes to change, which is often difficult, we have Sheldon here that says change is never fun. They say it is, but it's not. We want to teach change. We want to use some kind of change picture icon. And when we're teaching it, we want to structure the teaching situation so that we're going from something the child enjoys to something they love, so that they don't get introduced to change when it's always going to be something that is not as desirable for them. So doing a lot of trials where we're like, that's a change, but it's something better, so that when it is something not as desirable that changes, it won't be an automatic meltdown if they see change on their schedule. You can have a schedule that says it's now literacy time, but then once I get to literacy, I need to know what's going to happen, and then we can break down the steps of what's going to happen. Same thing, you saw that washing hands picture, and then if we need to break down all those steps of what it means to actually wash your hands and visually support those, and then we can support the child moving through that routine with those visuals. You could have real pictures of their favorite items, so that when you take them shopping, they can hold those and then help, when it's time to go find them. It's a great way to engage them and keep them hopefully engaged in the shopping process, and know, again, when we're teaching them how to go shopping with us, that we're only going to go find 3 of their favorite items, and we're not doing a list of 20 things if they can't handle shopping. But we can start to acclimate them to the shopping experience if we have pictures that support them just going to find their favorite things, paying for it, and getting out and creating routines, and then being able to expand on those as time goes on. Toileting, and breaking down the whole toileting step, so it's not overwhelmed with, just toileting, but I need to know all the steps of toileting. Work systems, as they get older, kids get older, and we're using the systematic way of teaching them something. They're often used to provide the structure needed for kids to learn. They visually represent what work has to be done, how much work do I need to do, how do I know when I'm finished, and then what's going to happen next. These work systems really aid in helping children on the spectrum to work to independence. So they're learning maybe on a one-on-one with an instructor about how to do a particular activity. And then we put it into a work system where we're really working on independent work, so that as they grow older, our goal is to have them have the same goal as everybody else through education, is to be able to have meaningful employment. And we have to teach individuals how to work independently. It has to be taught. We can't expect a child to have a lot of one-on-one instruction through their whole educational experience and then be able to go and work out in the community. So using work systems is a way to begin teaching independent work. Here's an example of what a visual work system might look like. You see on the left, it says you're going to do activities 1, 2, 3. In those boxes are the activities along with visual instructions. And then we move the number over to finished when we're done with that. And we keep working until we're all done with this work. And then we know that that task is done. Here's some higher level work systems to do and finished, so we can keep moving kids along as they learn to be more independent, even within a group learning environment. Here's some examples, some prompt cards for different behavioral expectations we can bring along with us. So there's a lot of ideas and interventions. They're grouped into 3 categories, though, so they have enough evidence base. These are the ones that we recommend here at the Autism program. We also recommend things that have promising interventions, that have some level of research to them that shows that they're promising, but we don't recommend things that have unproven or controversial interventions. So really try to guide families to practices that we know will yield the most outcome. We all have limited resources of time, energy, money. So where are we going to put those things? And so we really try to guide families to those interventions that have some kind of a proven track record for outcomes. One of the interventions is applied behavior analysis, along with making sure we have a really good speech therapist and occupational therapist for all those sensory and fine motor needs. Having a good behavioral interventions is really important for many people on the autism spectrum. We'll show a little video here of what ABA is.
The definition of applied behavior analysis is the application of behavioral laws to change socially significant behavior to a meaningful degree. Socially significant behaviors can include social, language, academic, daily living, self-care, vocational, and leisure activities that improve the life experiences of the individual. Although ABA has recently received a lot of attention for being used for children with autism, it has been used for decades to solve many types of behavioral problems. When you watch a show at an animal park, you might consider what the whale and the trainers had to do to prepare for the show. The whale had been trained many hours by animal trainers who use the methods of applied behavior analysis, such as shaping, differential reinforcement, and positive reinforcement. ABA is used to teach skills to many populations. It's used in general education classrooms as well as special education classrooms. It's used by businesses to improve employee performance and customer satisfaction. It's also used to change people's behavior in regards to their health and fitness, to name a few. How do you recognize an ABA procedure or program? There are defining characteristics of ABA that make it what it is. Applied behavior analysis is the field of psychology focused on analyzing and modifying human behavior and solving socially significant problems. ABA focuses on changing behavior rather than labels, cognition, or personality. For example, ABA can be used to decrease behavioral excesses and deficits associated with autism. For some children with autism, self-stimulation is a behavior that interferes with learning and socialization. Behavior analysts can use behavior change procedures to replace these types of behaviors.
Hippo! You're right, a hippo lives at the zoo. Find another. Where's the hippo?
ABA relies on procedures based on principles of behavior that have been founded on more than 40 years of research across diverse populations. ABA emphasizes the modification of environmental events to change behavior. Data are taken on observable events and analyzed. Once the variables that are controlling the behavior have been identified, they are modified in such a way that the behavior increases or decreases. In the case of Grayson, his self-stimulatory behavior decreased as appropriate play behaviors were taught.
We're back. So that was a good overview of what applied behavior analysis and might look like in a clinic setting. Again, we can use ABA to help with language skills, self-help skills, play skills, academic skills. We can also help to decrease the maladaptive behaviors such as aggression and self-stim behaviors and self-injury. At the National Professional Development Center on ASD, you can find 27 evidence-based practices, and the link is there. There's also some really great free online autism training. The Autism Internet modules are high-quality information professional development for anyone who supports, instructs, works, or lives with someone with autism. Those are the format is mostly reading with some video. At the Autism Certification Center, there's a free 90-minute Many Faces of Autism video. That's all, no reading is required there. There is a low cost if you want to purchase their 10.5-hour training, unless you live in Ohio and it's free. And through COVID on and off, sometimes they've offered that for free, but you might check that out. And then Autism Speaks offers all kinds of free toolkits, things for toilet training, picky eaters, sleep issues, helping grandparents understanding autism. There's many, many toolkits there. So I really encourage you to check out all these websites. So supporting independence and success, giving clear instructions, checking for understanding, writing down rules and guidelines, and helping create checklists and task completion lists. These are all strategies that can be helpful. With social skills, they really need to be taught. We need to use the cognitive part of the brain to really help teach the part of the brain that the social understanding isn't made easy. Finding their areas of high interest to create social opportunities. If they're interested in, woodworking or airplanes, and really finding those ways to, find other groups of individuals that are interested in some of the same things to improve their social opportunities. And also educating peers as they get older and are in school and the opportunities present themselves. Peer understanding of can go a really long way in building acceptance of these kiddos. For emotional regulation, providing space for calming and reorganizing, scanning your environment at what's new and having a strategy of a quiet corner or an escape route if you need to. Teaching those coping skills. There's something called the 5-point scale for emotional regulation, which can be really helpful in teaching emotional regulation. Teaching emotion has to be very directly taught. Teaching problem solving, and providing lots of opportunities to practice these skills with the scaffolding that the kids need so that they're successful. And don't forget to use visual strategies. Family issues. It's known that families of children with ASD really experience higher levels of stress, even compared to other disability groups. Having difficulties in the social realm really makes it even more stressful for families to connect. There's this loss of a healthy child. And again, making this diagnosis is later in their childhood. Some disabilities are evident at birth and the parents have time to adjust from the beginning. For these kiddos, we're not making these diagnoses ever before 2, usually not before 3, and sometimes, much later, 4 or 5. And we've thought we were on a certain trajectory and we find we're on a different course. And it takes time to acknowledge the stages of grief that you're now, it's going to be something different than what you expected. And after a diagnosis, something like this urgency to do something, being overwhelmed by the information on the internet, back in my day when my son was diagnosed, he's over 30 now, we didn't have the internet. And so there was a dire need for information. And now I feel my families are just as overwhelmed because there's so much information. So knowing where to go to and what advice on the internet to trust can be just as overwhelming. Sometimes it's spouses or significant others aren't on the same page, not accepting that there's something wrong with their child and accepting this diagnosis. Your extended family often says, no, they just need stricter parenting. That can be really stressful. Having a child that has meltdowns in public and having public scrutiny can be challenging. And getting into school, and sometimes our schools can be really supportive and helpful, and sometimes we have to really fight for those supports that are needed, and having to learn a whole new system of intervention and support in the schools can be really stressful. So how to cope, acknowledge and face the emotions of grief, that this is natural. It's okay to have sort of this cycle of depression and anger, and you think you're resolved and another milestone comes and the whole cycle might start over again. Scheduling regular time together with your significant others. Scheduling time when you're not going to be that autism family and have a day here and there that you just let loose is great. And asking for help and finding routines that really work for your family and sort of throwing other conventions out the window. And continuing your education about ASD and related topics. It's a lifetime journey. You're going to need information now, maybe about toilet training, and you're not going to need later on, but you're always going to be learning and growing just like any family is with their kiddos. So if you're in the Champaign-Urbana area, here's a list of places you can go for diagnostic assessments. Here we have currently have three ABA providers in our community that we're grateful for. We have several areas where you can find social skill programming. We have some great speech and OT services listed there. There's others, but these are some of my regular go-tos. Every community has a Birth to 5 organization, early intervention, that can help with speech, occupational therapy, and developmental training. Every community has an early childhood special education. That's for children ages 3 to 5 that qualify based on their eligibility for special education services. So contacting your school district to find out how to assess your child to see if they're eligible for those early childhood special education services. In our local area, these are all the school districts that have that you would be looking up online to find out the contact information for. Again, we have the services here at TAP at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. This is a picture of our resource center here and some of the ready-made visuals we have, but we custom make visuals for you as well, right? Social stories, and you can see many books and resources. We provide this free consultation and technical assistance, information referral. We are always offering at least 1 or 2 social skills groups every semester. We're training students constantly to work in the field of autism. Our contact information is there. Again, my name is Linda Tortorelli. You can contact me at the autism program at illinois.edu. I really appreciate you joining us for this webinar today, and we look forward to hearing from you if we can serve you in the future. Thank you.